Foreign Correspondents from the USA. I'm Isabella Soares, an associate reporter for Foreign Press USA. And joining me today is Nii Akrofi, a foreign correspondent from Ghana and former news anchor and producer for African News and Joy News. He is a graduate from the Adelphi MFA program and is currently a member of the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents USA. Good afternoon, Nii, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Isabella. It's a pleasure.
So, first of all, I just wanted to ask you, what are the main differences from reporting in Africa as opposed to being a reporter in the US?
Well, I'd say the very first main difference I'd say is access to resource, especially like resource persons, because reporting in Ghana, that's my home. That's where I grew up. That's where I started my profession sometime in 2005. So over the years, I've established lots of contacts. I have people, even if it comes to speaking to people in government, I have my ways of reaching out to people, even if I don't have direct access to them. So it's easier doing that back home. But being here in America, it's a bit of a challenge because if you don't really have a reliable network of other colleagues to fall back on, or you don't even know who to speak to get access to who, it can be a bit challenging. But the plus side also is that sometimes it's easy to get email addresses or even the office numbers of some of the people you are really interested in talking to. Just search them up on the internet and you find them. So it's much easier back home, but I wouldn't say it's entirely difficult here. It depends on if you know the tricks of the trade. Yeah.
Yes, of course. And you reported in the U.S. elections last year. What would you say would be the main differences and also some similarities between the U.S. elections in 2020 and the Liberia elections that you also reported on in 2017?
I think one main difference that I noticed was the fact that here in the US, of course, maybe COVID might have played a role also because we were expecting a huge turnout. I was at the Madison Square Garden reporting from there. And when I got, I was pleasantly surprised. There were absolutely no people in line. It was like nothing was happening over there. I actually went around the place once, not knowing that that was the voting center that I was going to report from because I wasn't seeing any lines. And meanwhile, in Liberia, I left my hotel room, I think, at about 5 a.m. and got to my first polling center by 6 a.m. There was already a very long line, and voting was starting at 7 a.m. local time. And here in the US, I got to the voting center like around 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and there was virtually nobody to be seen. And even when I finally made my way in, the voting process was so quick. So I think that's one of the main difference. And also probably because they use the electronic balloting, they have balloting ahead of time, early voting as well. So I think it cuts down the numbers so people don't have to stay in line for so long just to vote. Yeah.
And I wanted to quickly mention last year you had an article featured in Zangarbeta about Ashley Roxanne Peterson, the youngest Black opto-
Osteopathic
osteopathic,
doctor. Yeah.
yes, osteopathic physician in America. What
Yeah.
drew you to this story and in the first place, and what were the takeaways that you had from this conversation with Ashley?
Well, the first thing was I had just signed up to Zenga at the time to be a freelancer for them, and they had a list of stories that they wanted the reporters or freelancers who were signing up to do. And what caught my attention immediately was the fact that there's a young Black woman who has become the youngest ever, at least up to that time. We're not too sure about now. Maybe even when I interviewed her, she kept stressing that, no, Nii, don't say that I'm the youngest ever because it may have changed in the year that since I graduated. But the truth is, as at the time I did the article and we published it, she was still the youngest Black osteopathic doctor to have graduated from the program in the US. So that was one of the first things that caught my attention, that, you know, there are stories about people like this that are going about, and people don't even really know that much about her. So it caught my attention immediately. And even though I had no means of reaching her, just as I said to the earlier question, I just went online and then tried to do a search, and I found her social media. So I tried reaching out to her through that. And one of the other persons in the story, Dr. Ward, whom I also spoke to, I reached out to her also through social media, and it turned out that she and Dr. Peterson were classmates. So then it made it even easier for me to do this story, because she spoke to Dr. Peterson that, listen, there's a journalist trying to reach out to you. He says he sent you messages in your DM. Just check it and then and respond to it, and that helped a bit. And the takeaway for me was that the, I mean, of course, we in journalism school, for instance, we were told that when it bleeds, it leads. But I've not been one who has always been interested in following the story because it bleeds, so it leads. I'm more interested in the human story. And finding someone like Ashley Peterson was one of those highlights for me, that indeed there are stories that will sell. Well, sell is a relative word, but there are stories that are important that need to be put out there. Stories like about people like Dr. Ashley Peterson that people need to read about, not because it's so extraordinary, or no, extraordinary is actually the right word I should use, because she's doing something extraordinary, but people don't know about it. She came from a family that was directly impacted by the Tuskegee study, syphilis study in the U.S. And instead of being bitter about that experience, she decided, I'll use that to my advantage and to my community's advantage, and help them get the treatment that they need. Yeah.
I like it that you mentioned that social media just made accessing accessing other people for stories so much easier. So I
Mhm.
wanted to ask you, how has social media impacted journalism in your perspective?
I think I think to a large extent it's had a great impact, to the extent that sometimes when I was actively in the newsroom before I came into the MFA program, there were times when, even if I'm not the one covering a particular story, I didn't need to be the one covering the story to let people know that I'm monitoring this event and here's my reporting. I like live tweeting a lot. So whenever there's an address by the president or any of the world leaders, and I am available and I'm by a TV set and have access to it, I tweet. I don't add my opinions immediately, but at least I make sure I get quotes out there for my followers to know that this is happening, this is what the person is saying, and you can read it and also get access to what's happening in live, in real time, without necessarily being there. So that's, for me, I think is one of the remarkable things that has happened with social media, that as reporters we don't need to be the ones on that particular beat, but we could also contribute to it. And that's also one of the things that actually got me to report for the EBU while I was in Liberia. I was there basically to report for African News and Euronews, who had sent me. But because of my live tweeting and my uploading videos in real time, EBU reached out to me and said, "Hey, we've seen some of your videos. Can we use them?" I said, "Sure, why not?" So yeah.
Yeah, that's so amazing. And
Mm.
I just wanted to ask you something. As a foreign correspondent based in New York, what are some of the topics from the US that interest the African population?
Well, it's interesting because back in Africa, people have different ideas about what it is to be in New York or to be in America. Everybody thinks America is the land flowing with milk and honey. So you are there, so you must be making money, and you have to bring some home. And I think doing stories about that, about the African community and how they live, some of the stories they want to know about, and I haven't had the chance to do as much of that, but one of the things I did was during the pandemic, for instance, I did a story for my former network, African News, about how the pandemic was affecting African businesses here in New York. I had initially pitched that I was going to do a story just basically about how Africans were surviving the COVID, But my boss didn't seem to be so interested until I spoke about, well, how about the businesses and how they are faring? Because I think at that point the first PPP loan had been sent out, and not many African businesses had received it. So that immediately was something that caught his attention. And of course, we knew that it was something that the viewers would also resonate with, because they would like to know how their family members who have businesses here are faring, and things like that. So yeah, I'd say generally they would want to know about living abroad, but I feel if you add a bit more about the economic situation and the realities of living abroad for those in such reports, yes, those are invaluable reports that you'll appreciate.
Yeah, that's for sure. And as also a reporter for over 10 years of expertise, are there any particular moments that stand out to you in your career?
I think there are quite a number of them. Um, One of them was something very little that I did. It yielded a result that I wasn't expecting. I had gone, I had been invited by an NGO that I was doing a documentary about. So I went with them on their walk. They went to climb the tallest mountain in Ghana, and we realized when we got to the village that the road leading up to the tourist spot was terrible. It was a mess, and this was one one particular spot that a lot of people visited. Even we have people coming from everywhere around the world, and they're like, "Oh, I want to see the highest point in Ghana," and the road leading to the place was in such a mess. And so I just told my cameraman, you know what, just keep rolling whilst we drive. I want to get these shots and I want to add it to my documentary. But when I got back from location, I just couldn't wait to finish the documentary before telling the story about how terrible it is that people who live in this community that gives so much or contributes so much to the national coffers through tourism are having to struggle, because even it's a farming community too. So because of the terrible nature of the road, trucks were not going there to pick up food, and the traders over there were also not getting access to trucks that come in to sell to them. So I just did the story about that, and within a week, I got a call from one of the people in the village that I spoke to that, hey, thank you very much for your story. They are fixing our roads now. I was like, what? They're fixing your roads? He was like, yes, they are. I said, oh, good. That wasn't what I set out to do, but I'm happy that at least it's yielded that result. And for me, it's one of the memories that I keep going back to every now and again, because it's something that I didn't set out to do, and I just did because I think in the moment I was angry that I had to see that um, people in this community were subjected to that, and it led to them getting better roads, and I was happy about that. Yeah.
That's so amazing. Such a great story. And I just want to talk about your blog, NASA Space.
Oh
You seem to
yes.
share stories that are often left out of the public eye, and you share a little bit of your insights as well to these stories. What are some issues that you believe are still left out from mass media?
I will still go back to the human interest story. I know some media houses. I've seen a few media houses here in the US try to do it, but I feel sometimes, not only for the US, but for the media in general, human interest stories sometimes often tend to be an afterthought. We are always chasing for the breaking news, the hard news, and we're always running after that. And we give just like another maybe 5 minutes out of the entire 1 hour bulletin to, or maybe even 3 minutes to a human interest story. And as someone who's been an advocate for human rights for a long time, and I've been part of the Journalists for Human Rights Ghana chapter. So I always feel passionately about the stories of the everyday man on the street. Sometimes I see it and I'm like, I wonder what this person is up to. I wonder how like I see the homeless people and I wonder what happened to him to end up on the street. What is his background? Could he have been once upon a time a big shot lawyer or banker or something, and something went wrong somewhere, defaulted on a loan or couldn't pay for his house or something and ended up there? those are the stories I like to hear about, but unfortunately, I don't hear them that much in mainstream media. And so, whenever I get the chance to do stories like that, I jump at it without any hesitancy at all. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes, I think human stories are just so valuable, and this is one of the most incredible things about journalism. And
Mhm.
this also kind of ties into my last question for you, which is at the end of the day, a foreign correspondent is indeed a storyteller.
Mhm.
So, why did you decide to become a correspondent in the first place? And what would be your greatest advice for someone who's stepping into journalism now?
Well, my um, which one do I start? Okay, let me start with why being a correspondent. Um, it goes back to the question you even asked earlier about what stories would be of interest to people back home, for instance. And I feel I'm here in this crossroads where I'm between two cultures. People on this side want to know more about that side, and people on that side want to know more about this side. So I feel I'm in a unique position to be able to tell the stories of both sides if I can, and if I have the resources to, and which often is the case for us as foreign correspondents. You have a unique perspective on life from one culture, and you're living in another culture, and you're learning about that culture as well and picking up new things every day. So you're in a position also to tell their story also to the culture that you come from. So for me, that's why I love this, and I've always looked forward to being a foreign correspondent, even back when I was in journalism school. So for me, this is a dream come true that I get to be able to tell stories from different perspectives. And the second half of the question, the advice that I have, um, I've always said that to when back home when I used to be a producer and I trained a lot of up and coming journalists. I always told them, listen, make sure this is what you want to do, and if this is what you want to do, then give it your all. It does. You will by all means fumble from the beginning, but you will find your feet eventually. So if this is what you want to do, make sure you learn the ropes of the trade and learn it very well. I'll give you a quick example. When I went into TV, I had never done TV before. I started my career in radio, and then I went into print. Then my former boss at radio had moved to TV, and I went to visit him one day. He said, "Do you want to join us?" I said, "Yes." I had no clue how TV news worked, but within a space of 3 months, I had learned as much as I could because my boss at the time was going on maternity leave. So I had to learn everything I could within 3 months to run the news channel while she was on leave, and then pick it up from there and run the news bulletins when we started operating full time. So my advice is, if journalism is what you want to do, right now there are so many avenues in journalism. Just make sure you pick one that interests you and learn it very well. And if all of it interests you as well as I have been in, as I have been interested by every other aspect of it, then so be it. Find people who can help you learn, whether be it radio, print, online, TV. Find people who can help you learn. If they can't, or if you don't have anybody, there are always resources online. You could always get something there.
Well, thank you so much, Lee, for being part of this conversation from the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents USA. It was a pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much, Isabella, for having me.